Welcome back, Kara. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me here again. I'm really excited to be with you.
I was just sharing with you before we hit record that I been looking forward to our conversation, and we did speak a little over a year ago, right?
Yeah.
Well, I truly enjoyed our conversations. One of my favorites when it comes to the going deeper into spirituality, in terms of meditation. In fact, when I do meditate now, I often think about little anecdotes from our conversation
Oh,
about
I love
the
that.
connection with the spine and different techniques. So I think,
What a big honor. That's such a compliment. Thank you.
yeah, no, it was a very beautiful conversation and with a lot of depth. And I think I shared this with you that I don't feel like I can just have these conversations in general with people. You can't just go to somebody at a store and just go into those topics.
Right. Yes. It's always so fulfilling to find like the safe spaces for those conversations when we're in this kind of modern world where we're so like from the mainstream cut off from that part of ourselves.
Exactly, exactly. Well, and the fact that you are practicing these techniques and now writing about it shows that there is a um there's a population that is ready for it.
Yes, absolutely. They're getting thirstier for this. I think that's for me when I started waking up, that was like the most appropriate verb for me was like I was so, wait, no, that'd be an adjective. I was so thirsty for like I just felt like that spiritual connection had just been dehydrated. And because I felt it a little bit growing up, and then I feel like it just sort of, as a byproduct of modern living, it just got, neglected. And so when I kind of started coming back online where I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much info about this. I want to know everything and experience everything. But I was so thirsty. I had this like insatiable thirst for more information, more experiences, more people to talk to about this. So,
Yeah, I think that was part of my catalyst to start my podcast as well. I don't always get into some of the more esoteric things. I try to keep it somewhat pragmatic so others can relate.
mhm.
But nonetheless, when we go into more subtle concepts, like today, you and I want to go deeper into intuition, these things are so separate from the modern world these days. And again, I live in San Diego, so I've shared with you, like it's hippie land. A lot of people out here get it and they talk about it. But you live in the Midwest, and I,
Yes.
I, I imagine maybe you could speak about that, what it's like to be a practitioner where maybe others may not get it.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you bring that up because I'm in Indiana, which is in the Midwest, as you said. And I was just watching something yesterday, this was a different podcast, and this guest just pulled Indiana out of nowhere. And she was like, well, it's not like Bob in a diner in Indiana is going to get it. And I'm like, hey, what's wrong with Indiana? Like, come on. But I am part of a really, really beautiful community of like but of seekers, of people who want to deepen their connection with their souls, but we are kind of under the radar. It's not like, everybody, but it's just funny. You kind of like the more you get into alignment with your passions, with what drives you, what makes you tick, which that spiritual connection is what brings me joy, and it's what I'm drawn to. And so as I've deepened that connection, it has kind of brought people to me that, you kind of magnetize to yourself what you're drawn to. And then you're, of course, like magnetized to it. So it's just really beautiful how this community has just kind of come up. And so it's easy for me to connect with people who are like-minded and who enjoy that perspective on life. And when I'm just out with, for example, my neighbors, I'm not expressing that perspective of myself. We are all multifaceted. So I kind of know, I mean, I'm always navigating. I'm sure the same as you. Like, when you found a safe space to express yourself in that way, even when you're having your podcast guests, like where to navigate the conversations. And you're doing that in your everyday life too. And it's the same for me, where it's like, well, I'm not gonna bring the like spirit perspective to necessarily every everyday conversation that I have with anybody I come across, but I guess I'm just used to it because I'm in it, right? So I feel like I have a lot of people around me who reflect it back to me, and I know it's not as many people as if I lived, in other places. So,
Yeah. And I like what you said that we magnetize or draw to ourselves those that are like, I would say, in resonance with our energy and our
yeah.
thinking. My father-in-law lived in Anderson, Indiana, and he would drive to your part of town to do yoga. And so those that are drawn into this level of spirituality, they're all over the spectrum. It's not like an age group thing. It's it's not a generational thing, I guess what I'm trying to say.
hmm Yeah, absolutely. And I am so fascinated by the youth that is coming, that's coming of age, that is going to be becoming adults. And I feel that there is something innate within the younger generations that are coming up that I'm curious, like how will mainstream change as those voices become stronger and more become authorities? You know what I mean? Because they're still kind of up and coming. But I feel that there are so many people being born in the last couple of decades who just aren't as like the veil isn't as strong for them. They're just more open, and they're more like, they're seeking out these types of conversations, and maybe and they haven't gone through the history with the density being the same level of density that it was like when I was growing up. They're just in a different environment. So I'm really excited to see how society changes in response to that as the population ages.
I couldn't agree more. My son's been around it his whole life. I named him with the spiritual name for a reason. He's seen me meditate his whole life. And I try to consciously integrate those principles into his life, but I also believe that I don't want to force it because he's more likely to be magnetized to it,
Yes, I feel
through
the
his
same.
yeah, through experience and through like our other favorite topic is intuition. Maybe his own intuition will speak to him and lead him to making choices in life. Because when things do get difficult, it's harder to find comfort if you don't already have a system in place.
Yes, absolutely. And I love that approach that you're taking with your son. And I have two kids too, two teenagers, and I get asked a lot, like, so your kids how do you get your kids to meditate? And I'm like, my kids don't meditate. I tried to kind of force it upon them when I was early on the path and they were younger. Um, I got such benefit out of it that I wanted them to have those tools. But what it did turn into was like I was forcing them to do it, and they didn't want to do it. And then it's like, wait a minute, this isn't healthy, and this is not going to make them be magnetized to it. It's going to turn them off. So I quickly like let that go. And so now I feel that I'm just modeling. So they know, they know very well. It'll be funny because they don't see me meditate. I meditate in my room. I mean, they can walk in if they want to, but they don't tend to see me meditate, but they know what I do and the work that I do. And so they'll, like a song will come on the radio. There was a song that was popular like a couple of years ago, and it was actually called Levitate or Levitation, something like that. And my kids were, when we first heard it, they're like, Mama, she's saying meditation or meditate or whatever. And we had to like really listen to it, but they'll see, or somebody will mention it on a show or something, and they're like, Mama, and but I feel like I'm just sort of keeping the door open for them of like this is helpful, but I'm not going to shove it down your throat. But because of the byproducts of how much it's changed me, I think that that is very compelling, and it also just helps the family dynamic because there is more calmness, there is more understanding, there's more compassion, which is just a healthier environment to grow up in than, the stress and the kind of fast pace that we were in prior.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, you were saying something about something being on TV. There are so many little references that once in a while my son will pick up on. We are a big Star Wars family, and
Love it.
we watch all forms of Star Wars. And there's the version of it with Grogu, the green
Oh,
character,
yes, The Mandalorian.
the Mandalorian.
Uh-huh.
And there's this one epic scene where he's meditating, and whenever there's meditation reference, I can see this wheels turning, recognizing there's something more to
Yeah.
this. But
Yeah.
you know, going back to the heart of the topic I wanted to go deeper with you on about about intuition. We hear that term a lot, like, oh, I'm just intuitive, or I was tuning into my intuition. And since you and I've last talked, I've gone deeper into my own desire to really, it sounds geeky, but really deconstruct because it feels so subtle and so esoteric. And the conclusion I've come to is I've got strong intuition, but I just didn't realize it because I kept thinking it had to be this thing, like, oh, like this booming voice or something else. And yet I've had this inner guide my entire life and helping me navigate.
Yes.
And like look, hindsight is 2020. I always look back, I'm like, I was on the right track.
Yes. I love that you're having that realization. You weren't speaking for very long, but so many profound things came through in the short amount of time that you were speaking. One of them being the subtlety of it. This is subtle energy. Our intuition is when we're reading, connecting with, interpreting, receiving insights, and the energy is subtle. It is not a booming voice. One of my, a very dear mentor of mine, in fact, let me make sure I'm on Do Not Disturb. Yes, okay, because I know he was supposed to call me today. And I'm like, he's going to call. If I'm thinking about him, he's going to call.
Your
Um,
intuition is telling you.
yes, he will. Sorts of things happen often where he's like, I'll call him. He's like, oh, I knew it. You just came to mind, and here you are, and vice versa. But he would say, we want the booming voice, right? We want like, okay, if I'm right in what I'm thinking, then let a lightning strike that tree. And that can happen, but imagine where we would be if we required for me to really believe this, I need the evidence that, and lightning needs to strike that tree. Well, before long, every time you see lightning striking a tree, it'll be like, yeah, but that happens all the time. You know, and we get these subtle hints like synchronicities where we're seeing the same thing repeating. So that can come through in many different ways. Synchronicity being like something that happened recently. The orange bergamot is an oil, essential oil. I don't know if it's actually, I don't know bergamot. Do you know? Is it like a tree?
Yeah, it's like I thought it was a form of a type of lemon. Maybe it's a type of orange,
Oh,
but
yes.
I know of it because years ago I was looking for natural ways to reduce cholesterol, and it's considered a natural way to reduce cholesterol. And it's
Okay.
a type of uh, citrus fruit, so to speak,
Okay.
from I thought it was from Italy.
Yes, you're right. It is. Well, last week I came across somebody talking about orange bergamot and Italy also. And it caught my attention because I used to live in Italy and I just I don't know. I was like, oh, interesting. I mean, it was just interesting information. I cannot retrieve the file on who it was that was talking about that for the life of me. But then a few nights later, a few mornings later, I woke up and I had been dreaming orange bergamot. And it was enough time had passed that I was like, is that actually what, was it orange bergamot or was it just bergamot? And so I wrote it down. And later that day, I looked it up and I'm like, oh, it is a thing. It's like an essential oil that you can get. And it said Italy. And I'm like, okay, my memory is correct. Somebody was talking about this. I think it was some recorded webinar or something. And but then I had the dream about it, and it wasn't like right away. And it wasn't something that I had written down. And I was like, I want to get this essential oil, or I want to look into this more. It was just something that like came into my awareness, and I was like, oh, Italy, interesting. And as far as I was concerned, I didn't think about it anymore. And then it came up today again in a different conversation. So, and it was relevant to the practitioner I was talking to, who was like, "Oh, I might need that because it's very good for stress and PTSD and emotional work." And I didn't know any of that too. I was actually asking her if she knew what it might have been for, but it really seemed very appropriate for her. So, anyway, it's like these repeating things that show up in our lives where they're different sources, different, it might be our dreams that are where the information is coming through, but it's subtle. It's not like, I need to, the minute I turn the TV on, I want to hear this word, or I if I don't hear this song on the radio, then I have misunderstood. It's just it is subtle, and it's the willingness to tune into the subtlety of it and to have that acceptance that there is this communication. There is this, I also think of like synchronicities as an example, as like patterns. It's like geometric patterns where it's like one thing that is repeating in multiple ways showing up in our lives. And that is communication. It's communication from the universe, from spirit, from ourselves, our higher consciousness. So but the same thing, intuition can be expressed and experienced in many different ways. We have all of our traditional five senses as a human, but then we have psychic senses or intuitive senses that are related to each of those. So like inner sight, clairvoyance, inner hearing, clairaudience, even smell and taste have inner aspects of them, the inner feeling, that clairsentience. Um, and those can be stronger. Like pretty much everybody has one sense that might be the strongest and the easiest for them to access, but all of them are available for us. So we may naturally, like for me, clairsentience, the feeling is like the most dominant. So if I am getting an insight, I just get a feeling or there's a knowing, but it might not necessarily have a visual, or I might not hear anything that confirms it, but I can sometimes get visuals and I sometimes hear things, and I have smelled and tasted things. That was like a combined sense. I was smelling and tasting at the same time, and it didn't match the environment that I was in. But so we all can access and use these senses, but again, they're subtle. So, and some people are born with them, but they're there for everybody. So they can be developed. And just like what, I mean, you're a beautiful example of that, where you're just curious about it. So you're tuning in, and then you're recognizing, then there's a remembrance in there of, oh, I've always been doing this, but it's subtler than what I expect. And that curiosity and that willingness to stay open to it is so critical. The other thing that if a listener is listening to this and they're like, well, I want to explore this more. I want to develop my senses. If this is something that's for everybody, I want to experience it too. The first thing that I would suggest doing is speaking that intention, if you know how to meditate, or it doesn't have to be complicated, but even just sitting down, taking a few deep breaths, maybe closing your eyes, And if it's appropriate saying it out loud, I think that there's more energy that's carried when we say things out loud. But if you don't feel comfortable with that, you can also do it silently, but you just want to be careful about keeping your thoughts like it's easy to lose your train of thought when you're not speaking it out loud. And then the energy kind of dissipates. But that would be the first step that I would say, just be in that stillness, like kind of slow yourself down and then speak to your guides, even if you don't know who your guides are, you don't, even if you're not sure you have guides, you do have a whole team who's ready and willing to assist you, and they want to know how they can help you. And so if you just speak that and say, I want to develop my inner senses, help me to develop my intuition, speak that out loud, and then just see over the course of the coming days or weeks or whatever, just see what shows up in your life. So you might find like books that, people might just randomly recommend a book to you, or a podcast, or some sort of resource for you that is a great next step for you. And it's actually an answer to the call. And that, however that's delivered to you, I mean, it could even be like an Instagram ad or whatever. The number of times I get like Instagram ads where I'm like, how do they know? I mean, I'm not even like looking digitally for this. I just thought of it. So every once in a while, something weird like that happens. Um, but you may find the answer to that, and it may not come like, hey, I know that you're looking for this, so just felt like I should send this on. It may just be like this thing just shows up, and it's a book that's exactly what it was, how to strengthen your intuition, or I don't know, um, that can help you, or an online course or something like that, that will take you on that first step and then kind of be that invitation to open that door for you. Um, and the last thing I'll say about it is that meditation is any kind of course, any sort of advice you're going to get about developing intuition, it's going to start with have a meditation practice. Like, and that can be for some people like, I don't want to develop a meditation practice because they think it's going to be super hard and complicated, and they're going to have to go and, spend days doing it. But it can be simple. It's really just giving yourself the right inner environment so that you can hear the response, so that you can, it could, because it's subtle, it's not blaring, and you can keep developing it so that it can strengthen, but really what's happening is you're more in tune with it. It's still going to be subtle, but you have more confidence that you're getting messages. You can kind of discern a little bit easier between this is just a stray thought versus this is inspiration, for example. But it is subtle. And to experience the subtlety, we need to be quiet and we need to be still and we need to get away from the noise. So it goes very closely together with meditation. That's definitely going to be an integral part of it, but don't be put off by that. You can meditate. It may sound bigger than it needs to be.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think of it as musically tuning in to something. And when you mention patterns, I believe those patterns are literally all over the place at times. And it's funny because I think now, like I mentioned to you moments ago, having now really started to pay attention, I think it's always been around me, like these patterns, and I got so used to it that I thought, it's just information that's available to me. Now I'm realizing it was my intuition picking up on stuff all along from a
Yeah.
very, very young age. And now in the last few years, something that I've been close to 12 years now is patterns like 444 and 111 and 1111. Like
Yeah.
literally to the point where I have screenshots of it every time it happens with the ones. And my
Oh,
son is now so used to me seeing the pattern that he'll show me whenever he sees the pattern.
oh, I love that.
But I think there's something there. And
Hmm.
also it helps you with decision making before you even know you're making a decision. And I really wanted you to go deeper into that because for myself, I've made decisions my entire life where I didn't think I was trying to tap into my intuition or inner guide or universe. It was just like, oh, should I study and then fill in the blank? Or should I look into this? And usually I thought it was impulsive. I'd just be like, yeah, do it, go for it. And it wasn't until recently spoke to a very spiritual woman, and she said sometimes what we think of as impulsive might be our intuition. We mix those two up, and then we dismiss it because we think we're just being impulsive.
Yes, I love that wisdom. That's one of the things with intuition is first thing that comes to mind. That's very strongly emphasized because we do tend to just like something came up. Oh, that was just the first thing that came to mind. So that must not be it. I've got to try harder. And it's really just trying to clear out. That's that tapping into the right side of the brain, which is the left side is the logical, analytical, and that's where we prize making a balanced, measured decision where we've weighed everything up and we've tried to be as logical as we can versus the right brain that's like, oh, this is just what comes to mind. And that's really important with intuition too. And that's been a big hurdle for me personally because I have typically lived my life very left brained until the last few years. And I've had major decisions that I have, and I write about this in the book where I'm trying to create spreadsheets with data to help me decide like should I move to this other place, this faraway place, or should I, um, you know, when my husband and I were living in England, we were trying to decide should we move back to America before we have kids or have kids there and then move back or whatever. I mean, I tried to create a spreadsheet and quantify all of these things, and it was impossible because it's a heart's job to do that. Like that, your head can't do that. You can't quantify these things, or you can force it, but it's just because it changes. Like how important is the length of maternity leave? Well, it depends what you're comparing it to. It might be a 10 in some situations, but in other situations it might be a 3 taking other factors into consideration. It's impossible. I'm sure somebody's created an amazing algorithm. I did not tap into that. I It
Yeah.
was a heart choice.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things you and I had talked about last time. Really, that's a great segue because the heart and intuition are so much, I want to say the one and the same, because when the very logical part of me in the past would have thought of heart, it was like, okay, well, it has to be a matter of something that I love, and it's a matter of something in my physical heart or evoking those emotions. And I'm now coming to the realization that the heart is more about being aligned with our soul.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the heart is such an amazing part of our being. And have you come across any of the information from the Heart Math Institute?
We talked about that last time.
Okay, yeah, just incredible the intelligence, the electromagnetism of the heart. But you're right, it's the heart is where our intuition lies, and it's that connector point to the intuition. And what's great is that we have all these signals from the heart going up to the head, so we can combine the heart and the head. It's not like oh we've got to get completely out of using our brain and our mind to make decisions. It has its place, but when we can have the two synced up, that is that's where the magic is. And just like you were saying, the heart, it is related to feelings of love, like the emotions and the feelings that go, the aspects, like kind of the more emotional aspects of the heart would be like your love, your forgiveness, compassion, acceptance. those are like when we're in those states, they're activating the heart, like they're getting energy moving in the heart when we're expressing those types of emotion. And likewise, when we're in the heart, those are the more emotional, like naturally the more emotional states that we're in. But same thing, like if you want to tap into your intuition, that is a great technique. Is to, it's as though like if you had your eyes closed in meditation, imagine you're dropping your eyes and your ears like they're going down a little elevator shaft from their physical place down into the heart, and imagine that you are seeing from the heart's perspective, and there is wisdom and intelligence there. So it's and again, it's subtle. It's like really hard to kind of verbalize how that is, but you know, as ideas and inspiration come to you, and it might be while you're sitting for meditation or while you're kind of in the heart's energy, but for me, the way that it normally works is that's kind of the setting the stage. It's like putting a problem or what I want the solution for, or where I want inspiration, or whatever kind of, however I'm wanting to use my intuition, kind of planting the seeds in the heart, or like you can even think of like broadcasting it out from the heart to my higher consciousness, to angels, archangels, like my divine team, my ancestors, however we relate to the help that we have on the other side. But it's like setting the stage so that that's now out there, and it's like, okay, help me with this and inspire me, and help me to know, to help me to receive the messages, like try to make it clear enough that I can get it, you know. And keep knocking if I'm not answering the door. And then, you know, then going about life and just sort of being open to the the universe speaking back to us in response to that call out.
Yes, absolutely. I think sometimes we, at least I can speak for myself, that you get so caught up in the world of ego and the head, and we forget that those choice points we've made may have actually been from the heart, from our intuition speaking to us. Like I mentioned earlier, I've made multiple choices in my life where I thought I'm just impulsive, but I was on the right track. And with
Mm.
hindsight, like 10, 15, 20, 25 years later, multiple choices have been made. And when I was working with fear, I could pinpoint what those results were. But when I was in flow, I wasn't overthinking, oh, I need to get the intuition involved. In fact, in those days, I wasn't thinking about intuition. But now I'm realizing the intuition was strong all along. And now
Mm.
I've come full circle as an adult saying, I really want to get better at this now.
Yes, right, right.
Right?
Well, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, no, go ahead.
Well, you raised such an important point, the fear versus just being in flow. And that is so important too. And somebody was just saying to me yesterday, I really feel strongly about this pivot that her life is taking, but there's a lot of fear there. You know, it's a huge change that she's considering. But she said, but I know what happens. I know that if the universe needs to turn up the volume to say you're not supposed to be going this way anymore, you know, I know that the results aren't very, you know, they're not very pleasing when that happens, when the universe really has to start kicking your butt to be like, you're this is not the highest path for you anymore. You know, you know the next step. So she's like, I'm trying to balance the trust. I don't want to move out of fear, but I also am very, you know, it's fear that's holding her back. It's hard for her to take the next step because she'll have to come out of her comfort zone and face a lot of fears and so forth. And I sympathize with that immensely. But she's very aware of like, if I don't do this, then I'm going to be answering to the universe because this is the invitation to the highest path. So I love, I love that point that you brought up.
And what you were saying, I almost feel like you were talking about me. I'm like, how does she know that? Because when I worked in corporate, so many years of foundational work had gone into it. Bachelor's and masters, a lot of a lot of work and experience and just climbing up the ladder. And time and again, for many years, well before I knew I needed to pivot out, there were just signs. And I got to the point where, well before I started responding to the signs, I would joke with my husband saying, um, the definition of insanity is repeating the same thing and expecting different results because I um, was getting this hunches, more or less, that I want to do something. But what that something is, I didn't know. And I'm doing it now, but I'm still building it. And I didn't have a blueprint. I didn't have a framework. I didn't even have a paycheck to land back on. It was just something nudged me that you need to do this. And there were no words, like I said.
Mhm.
But like you were saying though, that if I if you don't respond, then the universe starts setting up major post signs.
Right.
Like like I'll give you the story in another day, but let's just say at one point I was literally kicked out from a situation.
Oh,
And I
wow.
thought this is where I need to be. I'm going to dig my heels down and do such a great job. This is where I'm going to be. And literally I was told you can go now.
Oh, wow. Yeah, exactly.
And I got home and I was like, well, I did everything I was supposed to do with integrity. And
Mhm.
still, I think the universe is telling me that I'm not supposed to be doing that.
Yeah. Those are such strong messages, and I love how you talk about how like you were so intentional in trying to like tick every box. And I think that a lot of people, I mean, I know I can relate to that where I'm like, I did everything. I did everything I could and it fell apart. Like how can that be? And I'll still have things like that where I feel really strongly about something that I'm meant to create or that I'm meant to focus on, or this feels like the next right step. And then I'll take a few steps and then things will just start disintegrating. And it's like, but I had all these, this is one of the things where we might get intuition or intuitive hits that feel really right that point us to a path. And it very well may be the right path, but we may only need like 5 steps on that path. It may not be that we're actually meant to take it as far as we thought we were supposed to, that we kind of get what we need. And what we might need might even be the experience of the pivot, of noticing, like it's not about the completion, it's about the journey. It might be about the creation process that you kind of start to hone the skills of being in the flow of creation, but you're not actually meant to implement, or you're not meant to deliver, or you're not meant to execute on it because you're practicing the creation part, because that's the really important part for the next step, that is really what you're here to do, or what you're supposed to focus on next, or however it might be. Like that might just have been generating that energy within you because the timing wasn't right yet for this thing that really is meant to go to completion.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
things
that
are just mysterious that way.
well, and that's where it's so funny that you said things that are meant for completion. You absolutely articulate the details of how it feels when you think that's where I'm supposed to go. So now that I've made that pivot, and I'm one of those doers and completers, I'm going to go full force ahead. And I learned that, well, I'm not the doer, and
Mm,
the journey is the lesson. But
hmm.
one thing you do own is you do own the fact that those skills, whether you call them soul skills or what have you, they are teaching you to have momentum because our soul is intended to have momentum.
Right. Yeah. I love that. And I tend to see, or I have, I guess, like evolved over time to sort of see the the opportunity that we have with this life A lot of people think about life purpose. Everybody wants to know what their purpose is. And if we step back even more from what is my individual purpose, it's like we're here having a human experience. We are spirits in a human vehicle. We are here to experience. We are here to experience a spectrum of things. We don't incarnate here to experience perfection. This is not a plane of a perfection. It's messy, and we make mistakes, and we learn really strong lessons through mistakes. There is so much opportunity for growth and beauty at the soul level through the mistakes that we make. I mean, the level of compassion that I have is primarily driven because of the mistakes that I have made. Because I am in the shoes of the people who are mucking up right now. I'm like, oh, I've done that. I've done things pretty similar to that, or I've thought that. I don't think that anymore, but I've certainly went through a period of my life where I thought that, many years of my life where I thought that. So if when I can hold that perspective of like the totality of who I am, and that I'm still a work in progress. I'm still on this journey where I'm still learning, I'm still experiencing, I'm still making mistakes, I'm still saying the wrong thing sometimes and regretting it. And this is because I'm human, and we come here to experience that. And with all of the challenges, yes, the successes too, but the challenges, and even more than success or failure, is just the doing, the experience, the connections that we're making, the how we're feeling, the energy that's generated through how we feel. It expands us energetically. That's the opportunity that we have. So it's not even about like coming here and accomplishing, or yes, we do have individual opportunities, individual purpose, mission, however we want to think of it. But but you can even step back and be like, actually, it's even less specific than that. It's like I'm here to experience. So I'm off the hook, you know. Let me
Yeah.
just experience and take it in, even when it feels hard.
Yeah. Well, and when you said something about expansion, it reminded me of something, a thought that came to my mind during my meditation. I think it might have been just today, because I've been honing in on this concept more of just being in and just feeling somatically sometimes. Because often when I've meditated in the past, it's often been about the esoteric, trying to connect to something higher. And now I'm combining it with really feeling. And I know it sounds a little bit esoteric, but like let's say I'm not feeling that great, but then I'm also trying to focus. Then I
Mhm.
actually take a moment, I breathe into the space that doesn't feel that good. Or let's say I'm feeling unsettled in my heart or troubled in my mind. I acknowledge it.
Mm.
And those acknowledgments are almost acknowledging the contrast that's occurring. Because isn't it from contrast that we expand?
Yes. I love so much of that, because you're talking about some of the kind of not even fundamental aspects, but some of the fundamental opportunities that we have with meditation. And my guess is, I mean, I know you've meditated for a really long time, and I'm guessing that you're not new to the concept of being in the feeling, but you have been so focused on focusing that it's like new, and you're experiencing it experientially. And I have this happen regularly too, where I'm like, oh my God, like the present moment, for example. It's like, how many times, if you're in the meditation world, you're always hearing about the present moment. But when you like literally get in it and you feel it and you're in the center of it, and you feel the timelessness of it, you feel that suspension, you're and it's like, it's simple, but it's profound. And it's so funny because it's like, oh my God, this is what we've been talking about. I've known this, like this isn't new information, but the experience, like each time, it's like it's new again, you know? And it's like, I want everybody to know about this. And I'm like, oh, yeah, they know. But we always talk about being present, and everybody knows they're supposed to be present. But like, we're so, but actually finding the sweet spot, you know, when we're really, really in it and experiencing it, it just really transcends the theory, you know?
I do. And like I felt like that ironically this morning. I'm getting very much into like you and I are believers getting into the spine,
Mhm.
becoming aware of our breath. And for like a brief moment, I was able to just let go. And it was like this feeling of euphoria was floating through me.
Mm, yes.
And like that is what it is to be present.
Yes. Yeah. And it's so like, and it's like you try to explain it to, you know, and it's like being present, you know, and it's like, yeah, I get it, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's funny. My husband doesn't meditate. I consider him a spiritual guy because he's more zen than I am. I can like
Mm,
I can get feisty and stuff. He's just always
yeah.
pretty even keel. And we were talking about something a few weeks ago, and I was trying to describe it to him the feeling that I had just described on feeling that euphoric presence.
Mhm.
And he connected to it because we were talking about a Beatles song. And it was something to the effect of nothing can change my world.
Uh-huh.
And there's like things are happening all around you, but nothing can. And so on the surface, that song really seems like it's something about the physical world and the politics and what's going, but my inner world. And as soon as I described it to him from my spiritual perspective, he got it, but I also got it and started welling up in tears. I'm like, oh, the euphoria I feel in meditation.
Oh, you give me chills all down my back. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
What a blessing to have that experience.
But it's so subtle. It's always like momentarily. And then I'll be like, weeks go
Yeah.
by, months go by, nothing.
Yes, it is. It is subtle. It is. And it's so profound and it's fleeting and it's a huge blessing. It's all of that. But that's also kind of the gift that we have of the density of the human experience. You know, it's like my belief is that, you know, when we're not in these human bodies, our soul, I'm certain it carries on. We existed before we were born, we will exist when we die, and we're existing now in other realms. And in those spirit realms, there isn't this density, there isn't the veil. We understand that we are God, we are source, we are connected, we are all, it's all one thing. We are all connected to each other. We understand things that are hidden here. And then we get these fleeting moments where we experience it, but it's new. And we don't have that when we are not in this physical form. And that's part of what we're here to do is remember that's such a it's a euphoric remembrance when we get to experience ourselves as we truly are because we have signed up to have the experience of the forgetting. So it's like it's like I hear the frustration and I'm with you, but also there's such like in the actual experience and the little sip of the eternal, that is such a huge gift.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that really just goes back to the intuition. It's like I think of it as the breadcrumbs, the
Yes,
trail that it's leading
absolutely.
you, and sometimes the trail, not sometimes, I think the trail's always been there for me, like I've mentioned over and over, that I'm now recognizing that my entire life there's been multiple, maybe I thought of them as impulsive choices, but it was intuition,
Yes. Right.
and there was no conscious like, now I'm going to try to decide if I'm really making a good choice. It was more like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go off and do that, and then later I'm like, why did I want to do that?
Yeah. Yeah. And how did I have the courage to do it or the confidence to do it? And yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I'll give you an example, and maybe you can share a couple of examples for you, moments where that intuition was strong, but you may not have known that that
Mhm.
is intuition. But in my case, when I was in college, I studied computer science. That alone was a big leap because it was a new program. But I just had it in me like, oh yeah, I can do it. And it was a hard program to get through. And then we had to minor in a couple of areas. And something called AI was a big deal back then. This is like a long time ago, okay?
Yeah.
And um, I was like, you know what? I'll study that. That'll be one of my minors for getting my degree. And I got through it with my only straight A pluses. This is like way before anything was out there, even with AI. And I wanted to pursue it. My professor said, no, it's a dead end. Don't do it. And for
Where
years,
was his crystal ball?
I know. And I had actually been on the right track, like
Mhm.
investigating certain things in that area, considering getting my master's and PhD in it. I ended up going in a little niche area that ended up being financially a good part of computer science. But for years I'd be like, why? Why did I make that stupid choice? I mean, there was no data. Well, I'm all over it now, but let's just say that
Yeah.
sometimes you're on the right track.
Yes. Yeah. I love that. And I love how that was I mean, that was a huge life decision, that came in. Sometimes our intuition, it can lead us in all different kinds of ways, but it can come into play in much more minor ways, and that can be a great way to develop intuition or to notice the intuition that you already have, because that's an amazing point that you've been making too, is just, oh, now I'm recognizing I've always been led by this. And that's what I think that everybody, as they move through this path, it's like, oh, I had this is like, I have so many things are coming, like flooding back to me lately about from my childhood, of just like, oh my God, I used to do these things that I turned off, not like major psychic things, but just like the ways I used to look at the world. And then I like kind of changed how I saw the world. I mean, literally with my eyes, being able to, I have a memory of like being pushed in a stroller on a walk around my neighborhood, or maybe I was like on the back of a bike, like the baby seats or whatever. But and I was looking at the trees, and I could see the color beyond the physical tree, And then it was, but I don't even know if this is a real memory, because I was so young that I'm like, am I really remembering this? But it's like I can see myself back in this polka dot stroller. But and kind of like sharpening my physical vision so that I could just see the tree, just the tree, and not the color, that the energy around the tree, and there are things like that, of like being able, like seeing myself from outside of myself, like looking at myself from outside of myself as a child. And there's some form of imagination with that too, where it's not just like, oh, suddenly I'm over there and I'm no longer in my body. It's like I could be in my body and also be like seeing myself outside of myself. And that memory just showed up like a month ago, where I'm like, oh my God, I used to do that. And then I talked about it, came up the next day on a podcast, obviously, because these things just somebody else was talking about. And I was like, oh my God, that makes me think of this memory that I just had last night. And this woman is like properly psychic. And she was like, well, you know what that's called, right? And I'm like, it has a name. And she's like, well, that's remote viewing. And I'm like, oh, I hadn't thought about it like that, But so anyway, it's just interesting how much we do as children, and then we don't have names for it, it's not acknowledged. We might ask our parents about it and they don't know what we're talking about, and so we're like, oh, that's not how you see. Like, oh, I'm not, let me see if I can like look at the tree the way that adults look at the tree, that type of thing.
Yeah. Well,
But
the heightened ability to see energy. That's yeah.
right, yeah.
And that means maybe your soul is in resonance with that frequency.
Right, right, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So now
yeah.
maybe share with us more about your book. Because I
Oh, thank you.
yeah, and that was the intention behind this conversation. But I keep bringing us back to it, and
No, it's
I want people to hear about your book, and I want
oh, thank you
it as
so much.
well.
Yes, thank you. It's called Your Authentic Awakening, A Guide to Everyday Spiritual Living. And so it's full of like heartfelt stories about my own journey. And I get into some of the mystical things that I've experienced, some of the like experiencing, seeing energy patterns in my mind's eye and receiving information, kind of like what we might call downloads and how that has happened and the insights that have come up. Um, but also talking about some of the concepts, the belief structures that I have had to reconfigure, in order to move forward in my spiritual journey. And then it has some practical exercises as well in terms of how to move forward in your path without having to go and live in the Himalayas or uproot your life, leave your family. There it's like, no, we can keep making progress every day, very practically, and through the choices that we're making and through some practical steps. So there's plenty of that throughout as well.
Oh, and you should mention when you mentioned going to the Himalayas. I mean, that's something I was raised with, where a lot of people like, well, if you truly want to be enlightened or live a spiritual life, you renounce and then you go off into a life maybe in an ashram or in the Himalayas. And I envy those people. I'd be like, okay, you get to like dedicate your focus, but that is something that may not be feasible for all of us.
Right. Yeah, there are plenty of stories of people like leaving their families, like leaving their, children leaving their own children and their partners and things to go and live a spiritual life. And to me, that is not the highest solution. It's not required. It's not required at this point. Maybe, maybe in the past, the way that the energetics were on the planet, maybe people wouldn't have been able to go as far if they didn't go and live in a spiritual community, for example. I'm not trying to judge people for those choices, but it's definitely not required now. We have a totally different energetic, we have a lot more high frequency energy now on this planet. Um, it is feasible to keep moving forward, and there are spiritual implications for abandoning your people.
Dharma, your dharma.
Yes. And that creates trauma for people, and that is, not only is it not required, but that is that's negatively going to impact our spiritual lives. So that is, in my opinion, not the highest solution. And it's spirituality comes from within. It's coming from inside us. And so there are things that we can do to kind of configure our lives in modern living in accordance with our soul. And it doesn't mean we have to pick up sticks and leave our lives. So um, I think that's really important for people to, because that I think that is common. Like, oh, I found spirituality and now I need to run off and live in an ashram. And
Yeah. Well, I come from a culture, I'm Indian and I'd seen that a lot. And there was a part of me that would feel conflicted when I would see some, and again, no judgment, but when I would see that, because I think, wouldn't it be ideal, again, no judgment, if you are in alignment authentically with the life choices you're making so that you are creating a lifestyle where you can live in accordance to your own spirituality. So, I mean, and I can give you so many examples of that, but I hope that that makes sense that yes,
Yeah.
If ideally you don't have to defy culture after you've already made a series of choices, which only triggers trauma
Right.
for those
And
that
you
are
know,
with you. Yeah.
yeah, and to completely speak out of both sides of my mouth, there are parts of this book where it's like, as you go further in your development, you raise your frequency, there may be people who drop away. So I can understand how it's like, well, I want to live a spiritual life and I'm not being supported. I'm being made fun of in my the current life, and that may warrant like a relationship change. That is common and that can be warranted, but it's also it can be accessible in your everyday life. And even if you do have to go through a relationship change, it's, you know, it can be in a healthy way.
So, Kara, how can people find out more about your book?
Well, thank you so much. You can just go to karagoodwin.com and there is a little section there for the book. You can order it right on my site and it'll be available everywhere as well.
Wonderful. I like the way you wrapped up things, talking about bringing our intuition and lifestyle, and then really realizing that we can still have that integration
Mm,
in and based on the choices we're making now, because it is possible to live that spiritual lifestyle.
absolutely. Thank you so much, Shilpa. This has been amazing.
Thank you so much, Kara. Have a lovely day, and I will hopefully even get to read your book and have you back talking about other
Absolutely.
topics.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kara.